In eastern Peru, the Amazon basin extends in layers of green that from above appear continuous and without interruption. The canopy forms a dense surface nearly 30 meters above the forest floor. Beneath it, light filters through in narrow shafts. Sound carries differently there. Rain arrives not as a distant curtain but as a sudden, vertical presence. December marks the beginning of the wet season. Warm air rises from the forest and condenses into towering cumulonimbus clouds. Storm systems build quickly in the afternoon. Lightning is common. Aircraft crossing the region often encounter turbulence as humid air masses shift without warning. Rivers cut through the forest in wide, brown corridors. Smaller tributaries branch outward, thinning into creeks that disappear under fallen leaves and tangled roots. From above, these waterways appear as faint lines. From the ground, they serve as orientation in a landscape that otherwise offers few fixed reference points. Settlements exist along major rivers and near small airstrips carved from forest clearings. Beyond those narrow human traces, the jungle remains continuous. Roads are rare. Travel between towns often depends on aircraft. The environment is not hostile by intention. It is consistent. Rain falls. Heat rises. Insects emerge at dusk. Night arrives quickly under the canopy. On December 24, 1971, a commercial aircraft entered this airspace during storm season. The aircraft was Lanza Flight 508, operated by Líneas Aéreas Nacionales Sociedad Anónima. It departed from Lima on the morning of December 24, 1971, bound for Pucallpa, a city in the Peruvian Amazon. On board were 92 people, including passengers and crew. Among them was Julianne Coepc, a 17-year-old student traveling with her mother, Maria Coepc. Julianne had been raised for much of her childhood in the rainforest. Her parents were German biologists who had relocated to Peru to conduct zoological research. Together they established a remote research station known as Panguana, located deep within the Amazon basin. Her upbringing was unusual. She learned to identify bird calls and insect species before adolescence. She understood the structure of the forest, the behavior of animals, and the basic principles of navigating through dense vegetation. Her father emphasized practical knowledge. He taught her that in the rainforest, water flows toward larger rivers, and rivers lead to settlements. He also taught her that panic wastes energy. By 1971, Julianne was attending school in Lima. The flight to Pucallpa was part of a routine journey to reunite with her father for the Christmas holiday. Commercial flights into the Amazon were common but not without risk. The region's weather patterns, especially during the wet season, were unstable. Aircraft were often required to pass through developing storm systems. Lanza had previously faced scrutiny for safety concerns. The airline operated aging aircraft, including the Lockheed L-188 Electra used for Flight 508. Still, the route between Lima and Pucallpa remained active, and holiday travel increased passenger numbers. Boarding proceeded normally. There were no reported irregularities before departure. The aircraft climbed west to east, crossing the Andes Mountains before descending toward the lowland rainforest. The transition from mountainous terrain to basin airspace marked a shift in weather. Warm, moisture-laden air rose in vertical columns. Cloud formations thickened. Julianne had flown this route before. The sight of unbroken green beneath the aircraft was familiar. From cruising altitude, the forest appeared calm and continuous, without visible roads or clear boundaries. Rivers curved through it in broad arcs. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was routine. Passengers were seated. Seat belts were fastened as the aircraft approached an area of visible storm activity. Afternoon convective storms were typical for that time of year. As the plane moved deeper into the system, turbulence increased. Lightning activity was visible outside the windows. The aircraft continued forward. There was no indication that this flight would become one of the most studied survival incidents in aviation history. The aircraft entered a dense storm cell over the Amazon basin. As Lanza Flight 508 descended toward Pucallpa, it entered a developing thunderstorm system. Meteorological conditions over the Amazon that afternoon included heavy rainfall and significant lightning activity. Convective clouds rose vertically, carrying strong updrafts and downdrafts. Visibility was reduced. At approximately 10,000 feet, the aircraft encountered severe turbulence. According to later investigations and survivor testimony, a lightning strike occurred while the plane was within the storm cell. Lightning strikes on aircraft are not uncommon. Modern planes are designed to withstand them. In this case, however, structural failure followed. The Lockheed L-188 Electra broke apart in midair. The right wing separated. The fuselage fragmented. Debris dispersed over a wide area of rainforest. Julianne Coep remained strapped into her seat. Still secured by her seatbelt, she fell approximately 2 miles through open air. Portions of the aircraft cabin were falling simultaneously. The descent was uncontrolled. She later reported regaining awareness during the fall. There is no recorded evidence of how the section of seats she was attached to moved through the canopy, but it is believed that dense vegetation slowed the descent. Branches and layered foliage likely reduced terminal velocity before ground impact. She struck the forest floor while still attached to a row of seats. When she regained consciousness, it was daylight. The storm had passed. The forest canopy stood intact above her. There was no visible aircraft fuselage nearby, only scattered fragments. The silence was interrupted by distant insect movement and residual dripping from rain. She had sustained a broken collarbone, a deep laceration to her right arm, swelling around one eye, and a concussion. Her eyeglasses were missing. Her dress was torn. One sandal remained on her foot. There were no immediate signs of other survivors. The aircraft had disintegrated over remote rainforest. Communication systems were destroyed. Search aircraft would later struggle to see wreckage beneath the canopy. By the end of the first day, Julianne was alone in the Amazon basin. When Julianne Coep regained sustained awareness, she remained seated in the row of aircraft chairs to which she had been strapped. The metal frame was twisted but intact. The forest floor around her was layered with leaves and fragments of debris. There was no visible fuselage, no concentrated wreckage site. The breakup had scattered sections of the aircraft across a wide radius. She unfastened her seatbelt and stood with difficulty. Her left collarbone was fractured. Her right arm bore a deep wound. Her right eye was swollen nearly shut. She was barefoot on one foot. The other sandal had been lost in the fall. Her glasses were missing, leaving her vision blurred at distance. The first action was assessment. She called out for her mother. There was no response. She remained near the crash site for a period, though exact hours are uncertain. She located a small bag of sweets, Christmas candy that had been distributed on the flight. It was the only salvageable food item she found. Rainfall had resumed intermittently. The forest remained humid. Clothing did not dry. Insects gathered around exposed skin and open wounds. She recalled her father's instruction: if lost in the rainforest, follow water. Small streams feed larger streams. Larger streams lead to rivers. Rivers lead to people. The forest offers few landmarks, but water provides direction. On the second day after the crash, she began moving. Her injuries limited speed. The forest floor was uneven and covered in decaying plant matter. Thorned vines and low branches obstructed progress. Without glasses, depth perception was compromised. She moved slowly, placing each step deliberately. After hours of walking, she located a narrow stream. It was shallow and partially concealed under vegetation. She chose to follow it downstream. The decision imposed structure. Rather than moving aimlessly, she maintained a consistent direction. The stream curved and narrowed, occasionally disappearing under fallen trunks before re-emerging. At times, she walked in the water itself to avoid dense undergrowth along the banks. The candy provided minimal calories. She rationed it over several days. Water from the stream served as hydration. She did not attempt to forage unfamiliar plants. Her knowledge of the forest included awareness that many species are toxic if misidentified. She conserved energy instead of experimenting. Nights arrived quickly. Under the canopy, darkness deepened soon after sunset. She did not construct a shelter. She lay on the ground near the stream, exposed to rainfall and insects. Mosquitoes were constant. Ants and other invertebrates moved across the forest floor without pause. The rainforest does not provide silence. Even at night, there are insect calls, distant animal movement, and the sound of water. These sounds continued whether she was awake or asleep. On one of the early days, she discovered the body of another passenger. The individual was deceased. There were no signs of movement or life. She did not remain. She continued downstream. Her physical condition declined steadily. The wound on her arm became infected. The fracture in her collarbone restricted upper body motion. The swelling in her eye reduced slightly over time, but vision remained impaired. Skin softened from constant moisture. Feet were unprotected and vulnerable to cuts. She did not encounter large predators. Later analysis suggests that the density of the canopy and the scattered debris reduced the likelihood of immediate scavenger activity near her landing site. The forest's primary threats were environmental: infection, dehydration, exhaustion. Search efforts were underway during this period. Aircraft surveyed the region but reported difficulty locating wreckage beneath the canopy. The density of vegetation obscured debris from aerial view. Radio communication from the aircraft had ceased at the moment of structural breakup. Days passed without external contact. The stream gradually widened. It deepened from ankle height to knee height. In some sections, she waded directly in the current to maintain direction. The water was often brown with sediment. Fallen branches obstructed flow. Progress remained slow. Energy expenditure exceeded intake. The candy supply diminished and was eventually exhausted. After that point, she continued without food. She later stated that she did not consider herself in a survival scenario at first. The approach was incremental. Each day was limited to the immediate task of continuing downstream. There was no attempt to calculate distance or time. The rainforest provides few visual markers to measure progress. By approximately the 7th or 8th day, her condition had worsened. The wound on her arm began to host larvae. Blowflies deposit eggs in open flesh in tropical climates. The resulting maggots consume dead tissue. Without treatment, such infestation can deepen infection. She lacked medical supplies. She continued moving. The stream eventually joined a larger waterway. The current strengthened. The banks widened, exposing small clearings of mud and gravel. The presence of larger driftwood indicated seasonal variation in water level. These signs suggested proximity to human activity, as larger rivers are more likely to support logging or transport. On the 9th day, she discovered a boat moored along the bank of the river. It was empty. Nearby stood a small hut or camp structure, constructed of wood and palm thatch. The camp appeared temporarily unoccupied. The presence of the boat indicated recent human use. She approached cautiously and entered the structure. Inside, she located a container of gasoline. Remembering that kerosene and fuel can be used to treat parasitic infestations, she poured gasoline over the wound on her arm. Several maggots emerged and detached. The treatment was painful but reduced the infestation. She remained at the camp. Movement beyond that point required strength she no longer possessed. She waited. The rainforest continued its cycles around her. Rain fell intermittently. The river current moved steadily. There was no clock. Time was measured only by light and darkness. After 10 days in the forest, she heard approaching voices. In the years following the crash of Lanza Flight 508, Julianne Coep returned to the field of biology. She completed her education in Germany and later resumed research connected to the Peruvian rainforest. The environment that had nearly ended her life remained central to her professional work. The survival of a 17-year-old falling from approximately 10,000 feet without a parachute remains one of the most unusual documented cases in aviation history. Medical analysis suggests that the configuration of the seat row, combined with the layered canopy of the Amazon forest, reduced the velocity of impact. The dense vegetation absorbed energy that would otherwise have been fatal. These factors, while rare, are consistent with physical possibility. Her account has been studied in both aviation safety investigations and wilderness survival discussions. It is not presented as a model of heroism, but as a sequence of practical decisions under extreme isolation. She followed water. She conserved energy. She avoided unnecessary risk. She waited when movement was no longer sustainable. 91 others did not survive. The rainforest did not change after December 24, 1971. Storm systems continued to build in the wet season. Rivers continued to move toward larger rivers. Aircraft continued to cross the basin. The record remains: 1 survivor, 10 days alone, a path traced downstream. The forest closed again over the wreckage, and the event became part of documented history. The camp was simple. A wooden platform stood slightly elevated above the ground. A thatched roof provided partial shelter from rain. Tools and containers were scattered without order. The boat was secured along the bank with rope. There were no occupants when she arrived. By this stage, Julianne Koepke had been walking for approximately 10 days. She had consumed only a small bag of candy during that time. Her weight had dropped noticeably. The fracture in her collarbone limited movement in her left arm. The wound on her right arm was infected and open. Skin across her body showed signs of prolonged exposure to moisture. Her feet were cut and swollen. She remained near the camp because continued travel was no longer feasible. The river current was stronger than the stream she had followed. Attempting to navigate it alone would have required strength she did not have. The presence of the boat indicated that people used this location regularly. Waiting became the most rational course of action. The application of gasoline to her wound reduced the number of visible maggots. The treatment did not eliminate infection, but it slowed further tissue damage. She lay on the wooden platform and rested. Search operations for Flight 508 had intensified in the days following the crash. However, aerial crews reported difficulty identifying wreckage beneath the dense canopy. The crash debris was dispersed over a wide area, further complicating detection. By the time Julianne reached the camp, official search efforts were nearing conclusion. On the morning after she arrived at the camp, she heard male voices along the river. 3 Peruvian lumber workers approached by boat. They observed her condition and initially believed she might be a forest spirit, according to later interviews. Upon recognizing that she was injured and human, they provided assistance. They did not move her immediately. Instead, they offered basic first aid and allowed her to rest further before transport. The following day, they placed her in the boat and began the journey downriver toward a settlement with access to medical care. After 10 days alone in the rainforest, she was no longer traveling under her own strength. The lumber workers transported Julianne Koepke by canoe along the river toward a small settlement. The journey took several hours. She remained weak and largely silent. The riverbanks passed in slow sequence: mud embankments, exposed roots, overhanging branches. Rain fell intermittently. From the settlement, she was transferred to a more formal medical facility in Pucallpa. News of a possible survivor from Lanza Flight 508 had already circulated, though official confirmation of survivors had not been made. When she arrived, medical personnel documented her injuries: a fractured clavicle, deep lacerations, infected wounds, dehydration, and signs of prolonged exposure. Despite 10 days alone in the rainforest, her condition was considered stable. Authorities confirmed her identity through passenger records. She was the only known survivor among the 92 people aboard the aircraft. Recovery required weeks of treatment. Infection was controlled with antibiotics. The fracture healed without surgical intervention. Her mother, Maria Koepke, was later confirmed among the deceased. Wreckage from the aircraft was eventually located through ground expeditions guided in part by information Julianne provided about terrain and river proximity. The official investigation attributed the crash to a lightning strike that caused structural failure while the aircraft was flying through severe convective weather. The airline, already under scrutiny, ceased operations not long after the incident. There was no public ceremony at the hospital. No formal announcement accompanied her discharge. The event entered aviation records as an accident with a single survivor. The rainforest that had concealed the wreckage had also allowed her survival.